says LinkedIn doesn't allow
It says that it's live
whatever.
right now.
Okay, whatever. Well,
I think we're live.
let's see. Okay, cool. Well, we're live.
We're live, baby.
Welcome
Let's
to the
do this.
MHP Show podcast, baby. We're going to do this thing live. I'm your host, Derek Vickers, and on the MHP Show, we talk about anything and everything, mobile home parks, trailer parks, whatever you want to call them. And look, I got a special guest with me today. We've only tried to do this show 65 times.
I think it was like 80.
80. I forgot. But I got Mr. Eden Markowitz with Madison Specs with me today. How you doing, man?
What's up, buddy? Good to be here. We're finally made it happen. A lot of glitches and scheduling and everything, but we are here. We're live.
Yeah, we're here, man. I'm excited to have you because I know you're going to bring a lot of value to our listeners. And look, if anybody pops on here and they have questions about what we're talking about, shoot them in. We'd love to answer. You're still going to be able to, you're going to be able to get the recording of this. It's going to be up too. But anyway, so we're here to talk about cost segregation studies. So I'd like you to take us from like let's start from like a novice's point of view. Like, what is it? How does it work? And then we can get into, and I've got some more questions regarding that.
Sounds good. All right, so let's start from the beginning, the way beginning. So anybody who owns any investment real estate, right, that excludes your personal home, get that question a lot of times, can I cost seg my house? You cannot. There's situations where you're renting out rooms or Airbnb-ing where maybe there's certain exceptions, but any investment real estate can be depreciated, right? That's the key word here that we're going to be saying probably 5,000 times. Depreciation, right? So we know as we buy real estate, we're hoping that it appreciates, goes up in value every year. And if we ever need to sell it, it's going to be worth more than what we bought it for, right? At the same time that it's appreciating, going up in value, the IRS gives us certain tax benefits called depreciation, right? Which means things are going to happen to your property, whatever type of property we're talking about here, mobile home park, single family houses, office buildings, whatever you got, things are going to need to be replaced, right? Roofs, landscaping, fences, things happen, man. We're in storm season here, and I had a bunch of properties here in Dallas where just complete fences broke down. We had flooding. We had ice storms this year. So things happen and things need to be replaced. So IRS understands that, and they give us certain tax benefits so we can depreciate our property, which means we get a tax deduction every year on our tax return to be used against certain profits that we're making to lower our tax liability. So that's what depreciation is. Any investment real estate, you're allowed to take tax deductions every year against income that you're earning, right? So on residential property, that is 27 and a half years depreciation schedule. And a commercial property, it is 39 years. So in order to calculate that, you first need to determine the value of the raw land, right? What is just the land itself with nothing on it, no improvements to the land, no structures or anything? What is the land worth, right? So that is not depreciable, right? Because the land, even if the entire property burnt down and there's nothing left, you still have the land, right? So the land is not going down in its condition. So the IRS says, hey, you can't depreciate that, right? So the first thing to understand is what is the value of your land, right? Once you can establish what the value of your land is, I'm sure we'll get into this question later on, how to determine what your land value is. Once you deduct that from the total amount that you've paid for the property, not what it's worth, what you paid for the property, that is your depreciable basis, right? So let's just use $1 million and let's assume your land is worth 115%, 150,000. 850,000 is your depreciable basis, right? So now if it's a residential property, you divide that by 27 and a half, and that's your deduction every year. Commercial property, 39 years, 850 divided by 39 would be how much you get as a deduction every year. So that's what we call straight line depreciation, right? No magic, no fancy things going on here. Hopefully everyone has a CPA that knows what's going on, knows that you have the real estate. You got to let them know that you bought a piece of property, and they are able to start depreciating that property from the year that it's placed in service, right? So you buy a property, as long as it's ready for its intended use, it's completely built out, it's ready to be rented or whatever you're using it for, that's when your depreciation starts. And then the time starts ticking for your 27 and a half or 30 years. So that's what we call straight line depreciation. Before we get into, we haven't talked about cost seg yet. That's just pre-cost seg basics to understand cost seg depreciation.
And then so like in that example, if you would take that total depreciable amount and divide that over 27 years, and that's what you get to take
27
every
and a half,
year.
yeah. Yep.
27 and a half years.
Yep.
Okay. Got it.
Yep, that's the basics. So now we can get into higher level stuff and trying to accelerate that, right? So there are certain parts of every single property that can be accelerated, right? We can talk mobile home parks. We'll give a couple other examples, but for a mobile home park, anything, just imagine what the land was, not when you bought it, but when it was developed, right? So there's landscaping, there's fences, there's roads, there's pads, there can be clubhouses and interior items, furniture. There can be flooring in a clubhouse or an office or restrooms, window shades, a lot of other items. So those items that are non-structural, right? A structure is bricks, a foundation, a roof, HVAC, all other items that are non-structural on the interior, and all those land improvements. So just imagine anything that was added to the land whenever it was developed. Could have been this year, could have been 150 years ago. Those are land improvements, and those can be accelerated, right? So you shouldn't be waiting 27 and a half years to depreciate your interior items like flooring, window shades, appliances, shelving. A lot of items on your interior really should be depreciating on a 5 year. So it's a big difference. Depreciating all of that could be hundreds of thousands of dollars over 5 years, as opposed to waiting 27 and a half or 39. Then on your, you have your anything that's called land improvement. So that would include, like I said before, roads, landscaping, fences, pools. If you have like a swing set, outdoor barbecue equipment, anything that's not just raw land that's on the exterior, some types of deckings and boat docks. And there's a lot of things that can be qualified as 15-year property. So those items can be depreciated over 5 and 15 years as opposed to waiting 27 and a half. So that's the goal of cost segregation, is really to take a deep dive into every inch of the property, right? To break everything down. The example I always give that's easy to remember is, imagine your mobile home park is built out of Lego pieces, or your hotel or whatever property you have. Take a hammer, smash it into a million pieces, and then collect them and put them in their proper bucket. So you have your structural bucket, your 5-year personal property, and then your 15-year land improvement. So that's what a cost segregation essentially is doing, is breaking down every single inch, every wire, every light fixture, every inch of the property, and putting it into its proper category. So that's cost segregation before we get into bonus, which would be the next step. So that's essentially what we're trying to do, is accelerate the deductions that you can get.
Yeah. By the way, the one deal that you estimated for us, I don't know if we included, I don't know if I told you that there's boat slips there.
There you go. Well, that's your fault, man.
So we're gonna have to rework those numbers, brother.
Yep. We got it. The more detailed. So when we do an upfront proposal, we try to gather as much information about the property. If you have surveys, appraisals, as many photos as you can, it gives us a good idea of what we're looking at, right? So we'll get you an estimate. It'll be pretty conservative usually. When we do the actual tour, obviously we're going to go down to the property and we're going to see that boat dock, right? So it's important for us to know it upfront, because it gives you kind of a good idea of what you're going to be getting eventually. But it's not a deal breaker, because we're going to go to the property anyways. and inspect every inch of it. So,
Yeah. I'm
not the
gonna buy before you come, I'm gonna go buy like some flower pots and stuff and just stack them on the
that's
side.
right.
I'm gonna try and get as much as I can.
That's right.
And Mark's got a question, and we'll get to some more questions. But aloha, Mark from Hawaii. It's
What's up?
my gosh, it's freaking 5 a.m. there, I guess.
That's it. Rise and grind, baby.
That's right. That's right. So let's get into now. We talked about straight line depreciation. You talked about the other portion of that. So let's get into the bonus depreciation
Yeah.
and how amazing that is.
Okay, so bonus depreciation is what I call like the third stage, right? So we have straight line, then cost seg, then bonus, right? So bonus basically says any of those 5 and 15, the things that we can accelerate, instead of depreciating your flooring or your mobile homes, which we didn't talk about yet, over 5 years, right? Or your land improvements over 15 years, you can depreciate a lot of that in the first year, right? So now this is a little technical, but between 2018 and 2022, that was 100%. So if you have a property that you purchased in those years, you can take all of your land improvements and all of your 5-year personal property in the first year, right? And for mobile home parks, that can be a massive amount, right? It can be a huge chunk. So currently, where we sit right now, we're in 2024. It's at 60% bonus. So if you bought a property or property this year, it's going to be 60% of all of your 5 and 15-year property can be taken in the first year, and the rest of that 40 that you can't will be spread out over the next 5 and 15 years, respectively. Last year, 2023, was 80%. And like I said before, 2018 through 2022 was 100%. So that's obviously game changer, right? Cost segregation is amazing. Bonus depreciation is freaking amazing, right? It's accelerates it so much more that if you're needing these massive deductions in that first year, you can suck out so much more, right out the bat.
Yeah, and it's great because we got an estimate on a deal that we're doing and currently doing right now is that the total amount of equity on this deal I think was 1.5 1.6 million, and the investors are going to get to realize almost $1 million of bonus depreciation in the first year. So this is freaking huge.
Yep. Yeah. It's insane. And then, I mean, there's a lot of scenarios where I know in the mobile home park space, RV park space, where, investors are a lot of times negotiating with mom and pops, right? And they're doing seller finance terms. It's very popular, obviously, in this space. I know a lot of people who are putting zero down or very low down, right? Smaller guys or, smaller groups. They're not taking on a ton of investors. They're negotiating seller finance terms with zero or very low down payment, which means they're in the deal for $0, $0 out of pocket or very minimal, and they're getting $1 million in depreciation, right? Which is insane. You basically invested $0 or minimal, and here you are getting $100,000 tax deduction, right? Which is unbelievable. So if you're earning money on other parks, you're selling other parks, or whatever you're doing to, bring income in, you can be offsetting a massive amounts of that with little money down.
Yeah, and I think it's great. And unfortunately, we're tapering off. We're going to go to 40% next year, right?
Yeah, keep
And
praying,
then,
maybe. Keep praying. It may change. Yeah.
Yeah. We'll see. There was that. There was no talk about that in the debate last night, unfortunately, which is an
No.
important topic.
Yep. Yeah, there was no talk about it. I mean, right now, from what I'm hearing, we're not expecting anything to happen like today. It's not happening. Back in February, March, it was like, oh, this is looking good. It passed the House, it may pass the Senate, and then things kind of just put on hold, and we're just waiting to see. Probably just depending on elections, what's going to happen. So we'll see. I mean, in the end of the day, 60% is still pretty good. 40% is still good too. I mean, even if
Yeah.
you didn't have any bonus depreciation, I can show you numbers, and, even pre any bonus, cost segregation still makes sense in a lot of cases. We've become spoiled by the 100%, 80%, that it's tough to wean ourselves off of it.
True. It's very true. And like I remember the first deal we did a cost seg with you guys actually. And I got my K1 and I'm like, whoa, like this is awesome. My business partner was like, hey, you're going to get addicted to this. And I was like, yeah, it's pretty sweet. Right. Now, obviously, I mean, you have to recapture the depreciation when you sell. So talk about that. Like it's really just a deferral thing. It's great, but you still have
Correct.
to recapture that depreciation upon the dispo of that asset.
Yeah, so everyone always asks me, if I'm going to sell the property in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, what's the sweet spot? When should I, yes, do cost seg, when should I not? We usually say 3 to 5 year hold. It makes a lot of sense. If you're going to sell it next year, maybe it doesn't make sense. I've had scenarios where I've done cost segregations for people who literally were selling the property like the next month. They bought a whole bunch and they needed to pay down their loan, and their CPA advised them that just because of their tax liability for that year, it made sense to do the cost seg and then just pay back the recapture the next tax year. So there's no one answer to does it make sense. I would say what's very important is having a good CPA who's very focused, if not entirely focused on real estate. There's a lot of good ones out there. I'm sure you know some, I know some. It's key component of setting yourself up for success long term with tax planning. I mean, that this is could be a deal breaker for whether you're successful or not in real estate, how you handle your taxes, right? We want to make a lot of money, but we don't want to give away 40, 50% of the money that we're making. So it's very important to have a good CPA. And I also recommend like a tax strategist, right? So not just somebody who's going to file your return, but somebody who's going to actually strategize with you, work on not just cost segregation, but there's tons of other tax tools out there that can help you be the most successful that you can be and keep all that hard earned money in your pocket instead of giving it to the IRS. So in terms of recapture, yes, it's a deferral and it will have to be paid back. The ways that we can kind of get around that are doing a 1031 exchange. So if you 1031 into another bigger property, you're kind of just deferring it again, right? So instead of paying back the recapture, you're basically deferring that into property number two, which will obviously lower the basis of depreciation on property number two. So you'll just have less depreciation because you're just deferred your recapture. And then the other option is to, if you don't do a 1031 because you had partners or whatever, now you're doing it on your own, you can do another cost seg on another property to offset the recapture from your first cost seg, right? So those are, two of, there's potentially other options on how to mitigate those, recapture fees. But yes, there will be, either 25% or at your tax bracket recapture fee. And my philosophy is be smart, have we gotta plan for today. We also have to plan for next year or 3 years from now. That's why having a good tax strategist and being on top of your game is important. So just know, what's going to be in 2, 3, 5 years from now. I mean, we can't always know. You may get an incredible offer on a park that you can't refuse, and you need to sell it, and you just did a cost seg a year ago. So those situations arise, but try to be, to your best ability, properly equipped to, know that in 5 years from now, I'm going to have this recapture coming back. And, I always say, if someone offered you, Derek, right now, $500,000 interest-free loan for the next 5 years, right? You'd probably take it, right?
Probably.
So probably, right. You hesitated a little bit there.
No, I mean, I
So
would. I
okay,
would.
there you go.
'Cause
There you go.
I can multiply that money.
That's right. So the goal is, and the concept here is, yes, you will have to pay it back, but right, they're giving you essentially a loan for free that, yes, you'll have to pay back eventually. But in the meantime, what could you do with that $500,000, let's say, that you saved in taxes to the IRS? You can go out and buy yourself 2 or 3 more parks, do cost seg on those, and rinse and repeat. So, that's the way I look at it. I mean, there are people that are less aggressive and have never done cost seg before and are hesitant. But To me, it's almost a no-brainer if you need the deductions. Obviously, if you have no income for whatever reason, or you have other ways of writing off all your income, then you don't just do cost seg for the fun of it. I know people want to call me and hang out with me and sign deals with us, but we're not going to recommend you do a cost seg study unless there's actual income that you need to write off, right? So the first question I always ask people if I'm at a conference or whatever, I say, who do you use for cost seg? And they say, oh, what's cost seg? The next question I ask is, do you pay taxes, right? And
Mm,
if the answer is yes, then we can start the conversation, right? So if someone
yeah.
says no, no, I don't pay taxes, either because I'm not making any money or because I have other strategies besides for cost sake to mitigate all my taxes, then that's a different story too. So that's how I start a conversation usually.
Yeah. And I'm sure you probably like jar people a little bit. Do you pay taxes? They're like, oh, what do you, are you trying,
Yeah,
like, what are you, are you trying to get
I'm
at
I-
here?
I'm not the IRS. I definitely do not work for the IRS.
Yeah, you
I'm
should
on
ask
the
that question and have a shirt on that says not the IRS and just says
Yes,
like
that's
to
right.
make everyone feel safe around you.
That's
Um
right.
the one thing I was going to talk about, because I know, in the mobile home park industry, a lot of times we're buying from mom and pop, so their basis is low, and we're going to get reassessed on a property tax basis when we close on the property. And like a deal
Mhm.
that we buy in Florida, I mean, the property taxes could, double, triple, quadruple, maybe in some rare cases, but they're going to double or triple for sure.
Mhm.
And some people have strategies to reallocate, land value, home value, and all this stuff on the contract, so their reassessment isn't hit as hard. So how does that tie in with a cost seg, and how can you make those work together? Because I know if you allocate differently, like it can mess things up. But just talk about that a little bit.
Oh yeah, we could talk for an hour about this, but I'll try to give you the 5 minute version on it. So there's many different scenarios where sometimes it's the seller. If it's a savvy seller, I'm dealing with a whole bunch of them right now in RV parks, where the sellers are trying to mitigate their taxes and allocate differently. They want a lot heavy allocation to goodwill and to other items as opposed to the land and the land improvements, just because their CPA is pretty savvy and they're trying to leverage, you know, as much as possible for their client, the seller, to pay less taxes, right? There are other times where the buyer is pretty savvy and he's like, hey, we want to get more depreciation, or we want to allocate more to goodwill because then the property is worth less and then we can fight the property taxes. So there's a lot of moving pieces. It's a whole nother, maybe I can set up a show with one of our CPAs who can, I mean, this is a 30 to 40 minute discussion, literally. So it's not that simple, but what I recommend is, and I tell people, do not do this at home, right? Cost segregation is not like a 5 minute deal where you just say, oh, land's worth 500,000, land improvements are 250, mobile homes are worth 100,000, the personal property on the clubhouse and the bathrooms and whatever is worth this amount, right? If it ever came to an audit and you really just allocated everything yourself, that is a big no-no, and that can get you in a lot of trouble, and that's not what we want to get anybody in, right? So the best preferred method is to do a cost segregation study and not let your allocations contradict that, right? So
Mm.
how do we avoid that? If the seller's demanding it or the buyer is for some reason wanting to allocate on the closing statement, right? My best scenario is no allocation on the closing statement, because then it gets us as a cost seg company free range to get as much depreciation for you as possible, right? If you're going to allocate things on the closing statement, we can't, there's a lot of moving pieces, and we can't like completely disregard what you allocated on your closing statement. So we're like subject to some of the allocations that were there, which could be for the good and for the bad. But like I said before, from the sound of it, most people that are buying mobile home parks are not cost seg experts. Is you have to be a cost seg expert and a mobile home park buyer, you're in good shape, right? But to do your own allocations without doing a full blown engineer study, doing a site tour of the park, it's not recommended. So, what is the best practice? Best practice is to reach out to a cost seg firm during due diligence, right? Like you did very responsibly after I put you in your place a couple weeks ago, right?
You
When we
did,
tried,
man. You
well,
did.
yeah, when we tried to do this podcast round one, and we had some technical issues, right? So, um, reaching out beforehand during due diligence period to have the cost seg company at least get you rough numbers of what they're projecting, right? That's not the final. Like you said, we may have missed a couple things because we didn't have the full information, so there could be more. Normally we're not going to be lower than we projected, right? So I just had last week that we projected like 70, we ended up closer to 85, 87, right? So there are
Mm.
times where certain things were left out. We didn't have surveys, we missed out on fencing or some pools or whatever that weren't included. We try to do our best to do as much due diligence on the proposal as possible, but things can be missed, right? So the best way to do it is at least get a proposal before the closing, before any hard allocations. You can always do an allocation on your initial contract with the seller and then amend that later on. Say, hey, we reached out to this cost seg company. This is what they're showing as the land improvements in the personal property. We need to kind of adjust a couple things on the final closing state, right? And then you at least have a good idea, and we're going to be pretty close to what the cost seg study is projected to be, right? Best case scenario, and this isn't, it's a little complex. You can do the cost seg study before you close on the property, right?
Mm.
So you give us a month beforehand, before you're scheduled to close. You pay half the fee up front. We can try to negotiate something because you're at a little bit of risk, because if the deal doesn't close, you're out of a few $1,000s for paying for the retainer fee for the cost seg study. But if you get a hard final cost seg study before the closing, then that's case closed, right? Those are going to be your numbers for your 5 and your 15 year, and your 27 and a half years. Like that's case closed. You can allocate that on the closing statement and boom, like everything's kosher and done. So that would be an ideal situation. Most don't do it, but if possible, and you're willing to throw down a couple $1,000, um, it's ideal to do that.
Interesting. Interesting. Yeah, and you said ideally though, you like what you like to see is if there is no allocations on the contract.
I mean, for me personally, yes, right? Because
Yeah.
that gives us free range to be unbiased here and just come in and do what we do and give our full opinion, right? If someone's telling us that, this and this and this are worth this amount, right? And it's on the closing statement, it's a little bit risky because then you're kind of like trying to straddle two worlds, right? You're trying to depreciate as much as you can, but you're also allocating a lot more to, let's say, goodwill or whatever you are in order to mitigate, property taxes or whatnot. So it could get you in trouble if you're kind of just doing a little bit of everything and mixing these things together. I wanted to talk about, I don't know if we were going to mention this. I think last time we talked a little about goodwill, right? So I'm dealing with a lot of goodwill issues right now, and it's something that we as a cost seg company cannot determine goodwill, right? Goodwill is the name, the brand of the company and how much that's worth. Um, I had a deal this week where it was like a $3 million park, and the sellers were trying to say that the goodwill was like 1.5 million, right? And I'm like, I don't know. I mean, it's not a Hilton, right? We're not talking about a Hilton with a brand name. It's a mobile home park. Maybe Tony's mobile home park, and everybody knows Tony, and he's the
Yeah.
guy, and they all,
Hey, this
you
thing's
know,
been around for 50 years, man. This is
yeah,
a lot
that's
of
right.
goodwill and
That's right. But I'm not an expert on allocating that. But I think figuring out a way to properly allocate, if you're going to have to allocate goodwill, figure out something that's reasonable. Not 40 to 50% of your purchase price is goodwill, right? And just so you, the investor, knows, goodwill depreciates over 15 years, but you cannot bonus depreciate it.
Ah,
So it's
okay.
15 years, but you cannot, normally anything 15 years and under can be bonus depreciated. You cannot bonus depreciate goodwill. So it's still faster than your 27 and a half, right? It's almost, you're going to get it 50% faster than your structures, your buildings, but you cannot bonus depreciate it.
Interesting. Interesting. I didn't know that. So I think Mark had a question here on which type of properties are most suitable for cost segregation studies.
Ooh, okay. I thought we were going to get to that. Okay, so my favorite, right? I'm not just saying this because I'm on Derek's show and most listeners out there are considering or are invested already in mobile home parks. Of the best properties are mobile home parks and RV parks, right? And the reason for that is because we almost have, besides for if you have clubhouses or laundry buildings or whatnot, there's not a lot of structure, right? So it's a lot of land improvements, right? If you're paying $1 million for a mobile home park, let's say there's 0 park-owned homes. Why are you paying $1 million for it? There's a little bit of goodwill, but most of what you're paying for is the land improvements, right? The roads, the landscaping, fences, the pads. Majority of what you're giving your dollars to that seller for are for the land improvements. The land improvements can be accelerated, right? They're not structural. So on the low end, if you have a bunch of offices or you have, like I said, laundry room, shower facilities, restrooms, the more buildings, the actual percentages of your cost seg go down, right? So not to say don't buy a park that has amenities and whatnot, it just will bring the percentages down because you have more structure. So if you have a building and a roof and the HVAC and the foundation and the drywall and all that kind of stuff, we can't accelerate that. So a bare park with absolutely no buildings on it is going to can get upwards of 90 something percent of the purchase price less the land in bonus depreciation, right? So I've seen numbers many times this year. I've done probably 50, 75 mobile home parks in the last 12 months, and several of them have been in the 90% range.
Wow.
So less structure, more depreciation on an accelerated basis. So mobile home and RV parks, they're way up there. Car washes, car washes and gas stations are amazing for depreciation. Those have certain tax reasons why you can almost depreciate the entire property on accelerated
Wow.
accelerated scale. That's a whole nother topic. And then, there's single family homes, hotels, motels, senior living. But I have a chart that I can share with you that kind of we kind of made like a best to worst, like what's the best asset class for bonus depreciation cost seg and kind of the worst. So just as an example, a bare warehouse, right? If you just have a shell up and you're renting out a warehouse, right? There's not much, if there's no roads or no landscaping or whatnot, there might be a couple parking spaces. But if you just have a shell of a warehouse, there's not a ton of depreciation to be taken because it's all structure, right? But if you have, let's say, a self-storage property, which is not the best asset class for cost seg, but we do tons of self-storage because you have the roads that are leading up to the storage units, you have fencing, you have outdoor lighting. There's a lot of components, but self-storage is kind of on the lower end because there's no interior items, it's a lot of structure. So I hope that answered your question. Mobile home parks, 50 to 90% roughly, somewhere in that range, depending on the structures. Your average multifamily or single family, like short-term rental or long-term rentals, they're somewhere between 20 to 30%. So you're 2 to 4xing your dollar for dollar depreciation on a mobile home park as opposed to single family or multifamily.
Yeah, that's what that was gonna be my next question as far as multifamily, but you answered that. I mean, this is, one thing that I try to talk to, when I talk to investors, I'm like, guys, especially ones that, people that understand the asset class, they know what we just talked about. But newer investors that haven't invested in mobile home parks before, I mean, this is freaking huge,
Well,
right?
let me tell you one thing that I've heard probably 50 times at this point. I've talked to new and pretty seasoned mobile home park investors that have told me, oh, I asked my CPA about cost seg for my mobile home park, and they told me you can't do a cost seg study on a mobile home park because
Get a new accountant.
it's just land, right? It's just land. And I'm like, wow, you couldn't be more wrong than that. Like you
Get
said,
a new
either
accountant.
yeah, get a new accountant or give me your accountant's phone number. Let's have a chat. I want to hear what he has to say. I'll tell him my point. I'll show him the 500 studies that we've done this year alone in mobile home parks and how we're saving our clients tons of money. And people make mistakes. People are uneducated sometimes, but there's a lot of people out there that don't know about this, especially in mobile home parks where you really need to know about this. So, my passion is helping people save more money, right? We work hard. We're trying to support our families. We're giving money to charities, our churches, or synagogues, whatever. We're helping sick people out. We want to give back to our communities. We want to give our kids good lives, right? Why not save more money and be able to give to those things, go on a vacation or whatnot, and use cost segregation as a way to help you achieve those goals. So there is education and uninformed people out there, and this is really important to know, especially for mobile home parks and all of real estate in general. I mean, a lot of people don't know about cost segregation. I mean, I personally have been investing in real estate for about 7 years. I didn't know about this the first few years I was investing. I was doing single families mostly, and it's not as popular there, but there were properties that I could have cost seg in my first few years of investing. And I never even heard the word cost segregation. And then some people hear the word and they're like, what the hell is that? Just kind of skip on, right? I mean, if you're listening to this podcast, you didn't skip it already, right? But you may have seen your friends and may have seen the topic cost segregation with Eden and Derek and just said, oh, that's just some boring crap. We're just going to skip over this episode. But, to me, this is, whether it's me or someone else talking about it, this is an episode you need to listen to and send to your friends.
Yeah, for sure. And like it's super, super important because I didn't really understand. I knew there was a lot of tax benefits to real estate, but until I got into it and actually learned about cost segs, like, oh wow, like this is huge. And it's another strategy you can use. Like because we were looking at selling some deals last year and it's a syndication. So like we can't 1030, I can't 1031 out of it. And so we were, the idea was to buy more property, right? And just cost seg everything to at least, mitigate a good chunk of that gain. And, I think there's misconceptions about people that don't understand the real estate world that may like, oh, this is just a way for, rich people not to pay taxes. Well, put yourself in a position where you have a $5 million gain on a property, and then you're going to have to crank a check for $2 million to the IRS since they were there with you, sweating and giving you gray hair and dealing with code enforcement every day. They definitely deserve their cut, right? Sarcasm, of course. But this is a way for just like Ethan said, for you to, protect your gains, do more for your family, do more for your churches. And I love that. And I think people should do more of that. I had another question on, is there a particular size of deal that you would recommend as like, hey, this under 500K, I wouldn't do it. Over 500K, I would. Is there any number or kind of point there?
So it depends on the asset class, right? So obviously, if you're looking at a mobile home park for 500,000 versus a single family, right? We've been talking about how the percentage is 3 or 4x, right? So if you're looking at a mobile home park for 500,000 versus a single family, right? We've been talking about how the percentage is 3 or 4x, right? So if you're looking at a mobile home park for 500,000 versus a single family, right? We've been talking about how the percentage is 3 or 4x, right? So It depends. It also depends what year you bought it, right? If it's 100% bonus, it can make a lot more sense. If it's 60 or 40 and it's a $400,000 purchase, it may make less sense, right? My answer to this question is always reach out to me or anyone else and get a free proposal, right? We all love those letters, FREE, right? If something's free, we're interested, right? So you don't really have much to lose by sending me a text, giving me reaching out on LinkedIn, sending me an email saying, hey, I bought this property or I'm going to buy this property, right? What would my first year bonus depreciation look like? It could be $0, and I'll tell you, hey, this makes absolutely no sense to do. I wouldn't do it. It could be 40,000. It can be 50,000. It can be 500,000. I mean, we just buddy did a $138 million retail development with $28 million in first year bonus depreciation, right? $28 million. That's a hell of a lot of first year bonus depreciation. You know, I hope one day that we can get to the level where we need 28,000 bonus depreciation in the first year in write-offs, right? But
And that
I
still wouldn't
say,
take it all. That still
yeah,
wouldn't take it all.
yeah. So, you know, it depends on the asset class. It depends on the year that it was purchased, and then it's just it's a numbers game, right? We analyze what the numbers look like, and if it makes sense, I'm pretty upfront and honest, and I'll tell you, hey, you know, this is what your bonus depreciation is. This is at your tax bracket. This is probably what you're going to net on tax savings. You know, is it worth it or not? I don't think so, or I do think it's totally worth it. So, you know, there's no answer to that. You know, it depends on the asset class, but if you're talking about an $80,000 condo, probably doesn't make sense to do a cost seg on it, right? If you're, you know, there's no land improvements, a condo is just the interior items. You have no 15-year property. So I've had people send me, you know, $50,000, $80,000 condos, and I usually advise that it doesn't make sense, right? There won't be, you'll maybe get 5 or 10 or 15 grand in bonus depreciation, which is not going to net you that much tax saving. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, yeah, for
Kind
sure,
of,
for
kind of.
sure. Yeah, I mean it does, and I mean yeah, I know this topic can get pretty deep, and we could probably talk about it forever. But I want to give you a chance to kind of, you know, if people want to learn more about cost segregation studies, obviously they can listen to this episode. But how can they reach out to you to get, you know, a free quote if you have a property that you're, you know, you just purchased, whatever it is? I highly recommend that you give Eden a shout because he got me numbers back very quick.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
it's great.
Yeah. Our turnaround time on the proposals is pretty quick. If we need them done fast, it's usually within 24 hours. So, you know, we're on top of our game. We got a great team behind us. You know, we're over 100 employees at Madison Specs. We have great engineers, great CPAs, a great staff behind us, and you know, we're here to take care of you, maximize your tax benefits, provide great service, great communication, and just be there for you every step of the way. I have people telling me their CPA doesn't understand this. Can you get on a call with your CPA and their CPA, an hour-long Zoom meeting? We're happy to, you know, give any assistance, guidance, training. I mean, we go out here in DFW and other cities and we do seminars on cost seg to CPA firms. So we're all about, you know, trying to make sure, you know, we're always learning as well, but we're happy to, you know, try to educate and help people understand, you know, the deeper deeps of cost segregation. So, you know, don't hesitate to reach out to me. You can find me on LinkedIn, Eden Markowitz. I think I'm the only one out there, luckily. Eden Markowitz on LinkedIn, Markowitz at madisonspecs.com. Facebook also, I believe I'm the only Eden Markowitz. I'm pretty active on Facebook. So you can find me Eden Markowitz on Facebook as well. And my phone number, if you want to call me or text me, 718-710-9964. I hope I don't regret that sharing it out there. But I'm available to chat and strategize whenever you guys are ready.
Dude, Eden, I appreciate you, man. I'm glad we finally freaking got to do this after, I think I thought 63 tries and you said 80. So 81, baby. 81, we got it done.
It's not
So,
over.
but anyways,
You may press like the end button here, and it's just going to be like, oh, it failed to record.
well, I'm
Let's
not
keep our
sure what this
fingers
is going
crossed.
to do after we went live. I know it's up and posted, so it will be
Okay.
there.
Yes.
But yeah, we'll see how that works. But thank you all for tuning into the MHP Show podcast. This will release on Monday, and it's it's already posted on social media, so you can go check it out. I may start doing more of these live because it's fun. We get some questions coming in, and it puts my guests on edge because they're like,
Oh,
"Damn,
man.
I'm live, so I can't screw anything up."
I'm shaking.
No, just
I'm still
kidding.
shaking. Still shaking.
Yeah. Some people probably would. Like I've had people like, hey, like, can you delete that off your, this part that I said? And I'm
Hmm.
like, me personally, I don't think it's that big of a deal, but I probably said some rather wild things on here before. I know I have, but
Hmm.
it is what it is. So,
Just
anyways,
you and your raw self, man. Be yourself.
yeah. Yeah, I'm with you, man. Well, thank you all for tuning in to the MHP show. Please like and subscribe, and we will see you all next week. Peace.
Peace.